So, as I was getting ready for today's episode, I went onto LinkedIn and I looked at my next guest's profile because I wanted to make sure I did a LinkedIn uh, recommendation. If you know people that you really like and you really want to help, do a LinkedIn recommendation. So I go to do that today because I want to do it before he comes on the show. And what pops up? The first recommendation on there, it's from Mark J. Silverman in 2011. So this is what I said about my guest. As the VP of our sales division at Data Domain, I could count on John Sapone to expertly coach me in any sales situation. He would meet and impress any corporate executive or solve an internal problem immediately. John led our organization with a commitment to excellence and a passion for success that supported us to overachieve consistently. John is a sales executive I would follow to any organization, and I know I would be surrounded by winners. Officially, John Sapone is the SVP of sales at Snowflake, which is a cloud computing based data company. He's also served as vice president of sales at ServiceNow and at several other startups. I met him at Data Domain way back then, way back in 2011. John, thanks for being on the show.
Mark, it's such a pleasure, and it's so good to see you again. It's been too long. Thanks for having me.
Can you believe I wrote that back in 2011? Like I back then, that's what I thought of you.
Well, you were a real thought leader. That's what I have to say about that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It was foreshadowing. One of the things that really stands out though is you were really young when I met you, and now that I'm 60, I realize how young you were leading a sales organization. What made you want to get into sales leadership? Because you were a kick-ass sales guy, making money, having freedom. What makes you want to be a leader?
You know, Mark, I never really thought about that until you and I started talking about it right before we started recording this podcast. I guess when I go back and do the math, I was probably in my mid 30s. And to me, back then, I didn't even really focus on my age. It was really the mission that was at hand. And, you know, I'd learned so much over really a small period of time, not only because of all the mistakes that I made, but it was really the people that I was surrounded by. And it really, you know, it started early on it started at the beginning of my professional career, where I had a really just sort of an interesting journey on how I even got into technology sales that provided me sort of a foundation of where I was able to get to, maybe in some people's mind, in an accelerated fashion.
Okay, so tell me the story.
Yeah, I mean, so I live in Atlanta, as you know. I've been here almost 30 years, that is really humbling for me to think about. People ask me how I ended up in Atlanta back in 1993, and the truth be told, I was moving down here with a buddy of mine, and we missed the exit for Charlotte, and ended up in Atlanta at 2 o'clock in the morning, and ended up, stayed in a hotel. Come to find out, the next day we go to rent an apartment, and then the rest is, our roots were cemented here in Atlanta. And so we kind of perpetuated the college dream for a little while. And I realized that I didn't have any money, so I needed a job. And 93, we're coming out, sort of a small recession in the early 90s. And getting a job wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be, because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And so I went and applied at a Home Depot store. I didn't get the job. I could tell you the individual's name, but I won't name the name. I actually applied that same day for a job at Chuck E. Cheese. No joke. I didn't get the job at Chuck E. Cheese.
I love these humble beginning stories are the best.
It's crazy. It's crazy. And so I went home and sort of put my tail between my legs for a little while. And then I said, come on, man, I got to get a job. I have to pay rent. And so I went to Kinko's. I printed out a bunch of resumes. The next morning, I woke up, put on a suit and tie, and I found an office park, and I went door to door. And I just asked them if they were hiring. And then the third door that I knocked on, young lady, I could tell you her name, and I can remember her vividly. I walked in. Her name was Sherry. I'll just say that. And I asked Sherry if she was hiring. And she said, for what? I said, I don't care. I just need a job. And she looked me in the eye and she said, do you know the difference between a sales order and a purchase order? And I said, I absolutely do. My mother had run a small business, and so I had some experience with that. And so that day I got a job making $6 an hour, being an inside salesperson that looked in a phone book and picked up the phone and made cold calls for a technology reseller. That's how I got into sales.
Wow, training ground.
Yeah, it was remarkable. And it was a really small company, which was, I guess it was probably good and bad. Um, I mean, good in the fact that I ended up staying there 9 years, by the way. I got the equivalent of an MBA because, I became so close with the owner, and she was a true visionary and understand the technology and understand the numbers, but she couldn't sell anything if her life depended on it, because that just wasn't her skill set. And so I quickly elevated to become an outside salesperson there. And the organization, we landed a bunch of really big contracts in the next year or so. And so we started investing in the sales organization, and boom, I became the vice president of sales there. And now, mind you, I'm probably 25, 24 years old at this time. Yeah, I was 24. And I was about as equipped to be a vice president of sales as one of my dogs. And I have three dogs, and the three of them could have done the job better than I did, as I look back on it now. And I'm fortunate to be able to look back on it now. And that career was a great one because of really all the experience that I got there. And I remember the day I decided to take a different job. I cried. We cried. The owner and I cried together because it was so impactful
Mm.
for both of us. We changed each other's lives, and she was happy for me, and I was really happy for her. And in the end, it worked out really well for her.
So how did that make your career track later? So because eventually you went to bigger companies.
Yeah, there was a gentleman that walked in my office. One of the companies that we resold, it was a backup software company. He came in my office one day, and he kind of joked, and he said, "You own this place, right?" And I was like, "No, man, I'm just a sales guy," I think were my exact words to him. And he's like, "Well, we want to. I need to hire somebody here in Atlanta. Do you know anybody?" And at this point in my career, my wife and I had just had our first son. I had been at this company for 9 years. At some point, the owner and I were trying to figure out if I could buy the company, take a majority equity
Mm.
stake. And, when I started to really run the numbers, it just wasn't my passion had faded there. And I needed to get, I needed to get a little bit of my life back and get back to center and potentially spend a little bit of time with this child that I had just had. And I wanted to prove to myself that I could actually really still sell something. And so I decided to go to work for that organization and just carry a bag and prove to nobody else but myself that I actually had the grit and the scrappiness and maybe the humbleness just to go and pick up the phone and go and knock on doors again and go do some deals. And it was really fun. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, well, I knew your reputation as just one of the best sales guys in the company before you moved into management. So how
Yeah,
what
sorry, go ahead.
so I'm curious, what shifted you again to say, okay, now I've done this, now I want to lead people, especially the crazy people who are in sales.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, there were a number of opportunities in that period of time where I was at that software company to get into leadership, and I just wasn't. I'll just tell you, I wasn't interested in doing that, and there's probably a number of reasons that aren't applicable to this conversation, but it just wasn't the right time, and then everything changed, and I landed the biggest deal that the company had ever done from a commercial perspective. And this guy kept calling me and kept calling me because he wanted me to come to work for this company that I had heard of, but I didn't really know much about. And he hounded me. So finally, one day, I decided to meet this guy by the name of Dave Schneider for a cup of coffee. And so Dave and I sat down, and he convinced me that I needed to come out to California and interview for a sales position at Data Domain. And interestingly enough, back then, I knew I was kind of ready for a change. And I had a real good friend that lived in California. I hadn't seen him in a little while. I figured, you know what? I got a free trip out to California. I'll go and do this interview, but good news is I'll get to see my buddy that I grew up with, and I got to see my buddy that I grew up with, and the very next day, Dave picks me up at the hotel. We get a Starbucks, and I walk into the office of Data Domain, and I mean back then, I mean there maybe were 50 people there. It was I looked around the office and I was like, holy smokes, like there's cables running everywhere. Like this is like a startup, like real startup. And I walk into the conference room, it's a big table. I mean, it's a mess. Like a mess. And in walks this individual that next to Dave Schneider changed my life forever. And that man was Frank Slootman. And Frank and I sat down and we talked, and he's like, well, what are you here for? I was like, I don't know. You were the guys, you were the people that called me. Tell me why I'm here. And he didn't appreciate that. I'll tell you, it was kind of funny. I tried to play a little mind game with him, and it didn't work so well. And in the end, I almost missed my flight, and I called my wife, literally running to the gate, and I was like, I'm taking that job.
Mm.
She goes, did they offer it to you? I go, absolutely not. But I'm going to get that job. I guarantee it. And so that was the beginning of the relationship between Frank Slootman and Dave Schneider.
That's amazing. So what position did you get hired for?
I was a sales rep. I was like the sixth sales rep in the world. What I knew though, as I was flying home and sort of playing this forward, because I knew I was going to get the job, that was not an option. I mean, maybe I was a little bit overly confident, but I had this chip on my shoulder that I had something to prove to nobody but myself. And I literally said to Frank, I said, Frank, if I get this job, let me rephrase that. When I get this job, exactly what I said, because he was asking me about leadership and he had seen that I was a leader for a number of years. He said, when I become your number one salesperson, only then will I earn the right to interview for a management position. But mark my words, I will be a manager. I will be a leader at this company in 12 months. And so I ended up taking the role, and about 12 months later, I got promoted to be the director of the Southeast. That was in 2006.
I can't remember these years. That's amazing that you can figure that out.
Yeah.
So again, one of the reasons people get promoted is because they're really good at what they do. Then they get promoted to help other people do what they used to do, a completely different set of skills.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's always been, I've always had this undercurrent of a desire to help other people be great. And I don't know why. It's not anything that I've really spent any time trying to hone that skill, but I get a lot of satisfaction out of watching people do great things and things that make them happy. And as leadership, it's the responsibility of leaders to figure out what motivates people. Some people just want public praise. Some people just want to be, privately praised. Some people just want the money. And at the end of the day, as I spent my life, spending time trying to figure people out, I realized the thing that I need the most, the fuel for me, is to watch people succeed and help people succeed and do the things that are necessary for people to be successful and have a good time and enjoy and have fun doing it. And that's, to me, at the end, if I boil it all down, I mean, so there's definitely plenty of schools of thought around, leadership and styles and training. And I have an expression that I've used my entire career that is, natural leaders lead naturally. And when I'm watching from afar and I'm watching, sales teams, I can tell you pretty well who's going to be the next leader. They're the field general, as I call them. They're the people that their peers go to when they don't want to talk to the direct manager because they don't want to seem like they're stupid or they're embarrassed or they don't want to get exposed. And it's that one individual that everybody goes to. And that individual is always willing to take the time. That individual is the person that, if I went and said, hey, Mary, I'm thinking about promoting Steve or I'm thinking about promoting, Heather. What do you think about that? Oh yeah, absolutely. She's awesome. Like she's the
Mhm.
person I always go to. And that's just, those are skills that, that you just, yes, you can develop them. Yes, you can, you can hone them, but some of that stuff you just can't teach.
It's interesting in the Rising Leader program that I have, the module that we talk about leading in a group of peers. I actually confront the people and I say, do you want to be the person who gets promoted and everybody is like, he was political, he did this, he did that, or do you want to be that person who everybody's like, yep, that's the guy, that's the girl, that's the one, that's the person I want to follow. And you can consciously cultivate that as you move up the ladder. I think
Yeah,
that was
you sure
I
you
think that was
can.
something that was natural for you. I don't think it's natural for most people.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to really in your heart of hearts look to see what it is you actually want to accomplish. And for many people, their true north is a title. Their true north is being at the top. But that was never really my true north.
Right.
My true north I didn't have to be the VP of sales to have a direct impact on multiple people internally in the organization, or even externally for that matter, people that weren't even on my team. It's funny enough, I literally just received a phone call from one of my peers asking my advice on how to communicate with our CEO. I mean, I I don't have a dog in the fight, but it's one of those things that for me that provides me a ton of happiness, because this individual trusts me enough and trusts what I do and knows that I'm not going to judge. I'm not going to use this against them. To me, it's just a matter of, let me help you make sure that you're successful, and that's something that, I don't know. It's what I've always wanted to do.
Okay.
It's done me well.
I I know, again, that's who you are. It's not who most people are. So when you're coaching, when you're bringing up other leaders and you're coaching them and looking for that piece and looking to develop that piece of helping the people who are lateral to you, helping everybody else in the company, how do you coach that? How do you help bring that out?
Well, I mean, a lot of it starts with asking them what they want to do. And it becomes a real litmus test when it is, I want to be the CRO, or I want your job. That to me right there, there's a young man, he came in my office the other day. I mentor a lot of the young people here in Atlanta. It's great because we've got a lot of young people in the office. And I make them send me their 3 items that they want to talk about 24 hours in advance. And one of his first item was, I want to talk about the skills it takes to be a great leader. And so he comes in my office and we start talking, and I said, okay, so your first point that you want to talk about is how to be a great leader. I said, maybe we should start with, how did you become a great salesperson? Because you're an SDR or a BDR right now, and you have no experience in what it takes to be a successful salesperson. And what I have a lot of passion around this. I don't know any successful sales leaders that have ever not carried a bag and been a successful salesperson. Let me say that again. I don't know any successful sales leaders that have never been a successful salesperson. And I said to this individual, I said, everything we do is negotiating a contract. I just promoted you. You have 6 people. They're brand new. They've never negotiated a contract. Have you ever looked at our contracts? He said, no. I said, there you go. Let's focus on the skills it takes to be a great salesperson, so that ultimately you can, add a tremendous amount of value when you do get into leadership. I think that's the thing. It's, everybody feels like they can fast forward, they can fast track their career. And I'm not saying that age has anything to do with one's ability to be great at the next level. I'm saying experience plays a very major role in it. And there are steps that you have to take and boxes that you have to check if you really want to add value.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's say you did promote someone and you have someone on your team who is a little maybe a resource hog or isn't that much of a team player, and you have to correct them and you have to kind of get them in line. Give me a story of someone that you've been able to bring along and really mold them more in your shape than in the selfish fiefdom kind of guy.
I do that every day.
I know you do.
And it's interesting, and in the line of work that I'm in today, I mean, there's no fewer than 13, 12 or 13 business units that are on my staff call every Monday morning. And so every single one of those organizations has an impact on our ability to be successful in the field, an impact on my sales team to be, successful in the field and successful for our customers as well. And and there's salespeople, a lot of sales, that's a generalization. I'll stop there. There's a lot of personalities when it comes to salespeople, big and large personalities that our job is we spend a lot of time persuading people. Like I get paid to persuade people. That's what we do. We have this way of trying to go and build solutions and get customers to go and do things. And if you can't get the people, this happens, the people that those 13 people in line with your vision and get a vision match, a lot of times people have temper tantrums. And so there was a situation that I had where one of my vice presidents and one of our business units, it had come to a massive head where they were literally like, I can't work together, I'm going to quit this and that and blah blah blah. And I actually sat each one of them down individually, and I said to one of them, I said, you're an adult. I want you to go back and read the email that you sent to me. Read that email, and once you've read it, call me back.
Nice.
And this individual called me back and they said, I'm embarrassed. I said, you should be. You should be embarrassed, because this is not a personal indictment on you and your ability. You two can't come to an agreement because you keep digging your heels in. And here's the reality of it all. You can work here or you cannot work here. And I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to have a conversation with the other individual to figure this out. And if you can't figure this out, we're going to have to make a change. And that's it. And the funny thing about that was that it was, Mark, it was so bad, so bad that I couldn't believe I had to have this conversation, that literally the other day, I asked that individual that works for me, I said, hey, how are things going with so-and-so? By the way, this was a year ago. And his response was, man, it's going freaking awesome. Like, I can't believe all the friction is out of the gears. And it was you just got to take a step back and you got to rise above it. And it's when somebody realizes that it's not about getting your way and about getting a win, it's about working together to solve really the ultimate outcome, which in this case is taking care of a customer. Like, come on, it's not that hard. That's pretty recent.
My favorite part about that is that was classic coaching. That wasn't telling. That was letting that person figure out for themselves where they were off. Once they have that light bulb moment, now they're like, I have to fix that. That was really cool. It's interesting. I have a couple of clients in one leadership team, and I do these 360 interviews. I'm sure you've had a 360 done where you poll the audience, people above, people below, to find out what are they good at, what are their challenges, that kind of thing. And I said to one guy, to talk about the other guy that I'm coaching, I said, so when is so and so at their leadership best? And there was silence. We waited for a second. It's like, don't consider him a leader. I was like, ooh, cold. And it was brutal. I've been coaching them for a year, and I just got a picture of them both together hugging each other, and I'm like, finally, we brought that together. I'm curious, have you butt heads with anybody on your leadership team and been able to resolve it?
You mean like people that work for me or people that I work for?
People who you work with, like your peers.
Oh,
who have
gosh,
you
yeah.
butted heads with, and how have you handled it to make it better than it was?
Mark, I'm in sales. What do you think the number one thing we butt heads about? Splits.
Right.
Splits. I mean, come on. Everybody wants to, everybody wants to feel like it's theirs. And I had a situation with an individual within my organization, and everything was done. Like, we negotiated all the splits for this fiscal year, and then a new leader that reported to my peer came in, and they wanted to renegotiate the splits, and I said, okay, like, I could have just said no. I could have just said no, but what does that solve? And my question back to them was, why? Why do we have to renegotiate this? And it was, fact-based rebuttal. And my response back to this individual, which was my peer, is I said, you know, I think you're getting taken advantage of. I think you need to go and actually challenge some of the information that you're getting, because the information you're getting based on what I'm being told is actually not true. And that individual came back to me, and then the individual came back to me again and said, well, hold on a second. Is the individual that's responsible for this account a global account manager? I said, they are. Do they get 100% of everything? I said, they do. And she said, well, that's why my team doesn't understand. I said, exactly. There's a complete disconnect in what you're being told and what reality is. It's not a split on the account. It's a split at the leadership level. And that my peer came back and said, now I understand where the disconnect is. And the response was, we're good. And I've learned over the years that if you take the emotion out of it, I don't want that to come across as I'm unemotional, because I am very emotional. Unfortunately, that's just who I am. I try to hide most of my emotion from my team. But when it comes to the business aspects of it, it's just facts. And people are gonna not be happy, and our job is not to make people happy. Our job is to go and do the task that we're paid to do. And so splits is probably the biggest one that we butt heads with. Probably the second biggest thing that I deal with a lot is around negotiation of whether or not we use our contracts versus our customer contracts. And so that is one where I have to.
Even I deal with that one.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, everybody does, right? And so I have to deal with our legal team on, I have to deal with our legal team if I have conviction. And most of the time I don't have conviction, we should use our customer contracts. And so the other day we had lost a deal 3 years ago to a customer. And that customer, a different side of the customer came back. And this time, though, we were at the right level. We were at the executive level at the customer. My team asked me to get on with the executive and have a conversation about their paper versus our paper, and just sort of soften things up and get everybody aligned. And in the back end, I had worked with my legal team to finally to get them to acquiesce that if I had to agree to use the customer paper, they would. I get on the phone with the chief information officer and their chief legal officer, and he goes, "We don't have to use our paper. I just tell you what's important to us, and as long as you can address what's important to us, in your contracts, we're good to go." And it was, I think, the sigh of relief from our legal side, but also, ultimately the belief and the faith and the trust that they had that I was going to represent them and our organization in a manner that was, responsible, which is commiserate with my role. And so those are the types of things I deal with every day. Now,
Yeah.
the customers aside.
Yeah, the thing that you do really, that I remember you doing really well, is the matter of factness. It's, you may have the emotion, you're human, you have all this ego stuff come up in any given situation, but having that emotional intelligence, having that ability to set that aside, not press it down so that it turns into some kind of malady, but to set that aside so that it's just the facts. Let's just deal with the situation at hand, not the baggage that we bring to it. I think is the secret to almost every dispute. If you can really stick with what's happening right here, right now, and get to a shared set of data, then you can resolve almost anything. It's the baggage that drives it, you know.
I didn't have that always. I mean, I think early in my career, and that this comes with that experience thing. I didn't have that, and I would, everything was a nail, and I was a hammer, and regardless, go back and just hear a couple of the stories that I had to win. I had to win. It was my way, and I think you know, it was you sort of learn quickly when when you really ultimately understand what matters in the end, which is let's focus on the outcome. Let's focus on where we want to get to. And let's try to remove all the friction to get there as quickly as possible. And that's where I started to realize that sometimes, you know what? I was the problem. It wasn't the other person or it wasn't the other people. It was I was the one that was slowing it down because I was digging my heels in, or maybe I had some pride, or maybe, I wanted to feel people to feel like I was the smart one in the room. And then it got to the point where it's like, no, look, this is, if we get to here and that's the goal, then let's go do it. Let's go figure out how to get there fast. And I think that was a learning experience that I had. And I picked up on that definitely after I got married. That helped in realizing that it's not about always being right. It's about getting the right outcome.
Like that. I'm curious. Have you ever had a 360 done on you? Like people gone an
I
interview
have.
and then given you the feedback? Have you gotten some
I have.
feedback that you didn't like?
Yeah, of course.
How'd you deal with it?
Absolutely.
Tell me some feedback you didn't like and how you dealt with it.
Sometimes I'm told that I'm too direct. And that it was actually really good feedback. And I've taken that feedback and I've learned that words, you can have a single sentence and change one word and actually get a better outcome. Same or better outcome. And so there's
Can
an
you give me an
individual
example?
here.
Yeah.
Yeah, geez. Let me tell
On
you a
on
story.
this show, we put people on the spot.
No, I like it. I like it. So there's an individual that works here and he runs a really large account for us. And he had a really bad reputation internally because of I'm always right, I'm always right, I'm always right. And so as I started to mentor him, I asked him, I said, so tell me about a day in the life of you talking to your customer. Okay. Tells me about it. Tell me about the day in the life of you communicating internally. And it couldn't have been more polar opposite. And I said to him, I said, so, um, look, I'll give you an example. We must do this for the customer. We must do this for the customer. And I asked him, so why do we need to do that for the customer? Well, the customer is asking us to do this because they're going to get this outcome. Okay. So when you go back to the product team, why wouldn't you say, hey, listen, I'd really like you to consider putting this feature in our product because our customer believes that they'll get this outcome. What did you do? You said the same exact thing. You just said it differently.
Right.
And over time, and I've told this individual that he went from the guy that you pick up your phone and you're like, oh God, I don't want to talk to him, to I pick up the phone, I'm like, oh, I can't wait to talk to him. This ought to be good. Like I'm excited about it.
People can learn. See that? People can learn. Leadership
I
is a
can.
skill.
I can.
Communications is a skill that you can learn. It's so amazing. So you are a direct guy.
Yeah,
And you speak truth to power. Tell me about
I
being a,
do. I think,
go ahead.
go ahead.
No, you
No,
had
no,
a
please.
thought about that I thought was really interesting. You speak truth to
No,
power.
no, no. I didn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
You
I,
and guys like Dave Snyder and Frank Slootman are like, wherever I go, I'm taking John Sapone. How do you
well, I
become
don't
that
want to put
guy?
words in the mouth. You said that. I didn't say that.
I'm putting those words in their mouth. And if they're listening, I know that that's what they think. So why do you think that's the case? How did you become, a go-to guy for these people?
You know, I've talked to them about this, both of them actually. And I think one of the things that the world is full of great people. And I don't think anybody will debate that. But the world isn't full of great people that do stuff, that are doers, that run to fires, that run to challenges. And and I look, I tend to be somebody that really enjoys a challenge. Am I going to be somebody that goes and works at a company that's got 40,000 employees that can't make a difference, and everything I say, I have to be careful because so and so might get offended or blah blah blah? That's not me. Like I'm going to go into an organization. I could potentially just rip the guts out and then do what it takes to make sure that it becomes a well-oiled machine. And I mean, Frank and I were having a conversation about this back at our summit this summer, and we actually talked about a number of people that just washed out, that just were great, but lived in the past and weren't ready to go and do. And I think if you probably asked Dave or Mike, they would probably call me a doer. And I'm, by the way, I'm really proud of that moniker. I like a challenge, and even to the point where we do something here, they're going to say, all right, well, make him do it because he'll do it. And I'm like, okay, whatever. I like it.
Tom Mendoza introduced me to a guy named, I think it's Dave Riley. He was a CTO for a bunch of the big financial institutions. He's going to be on the podcast. And his thing is the reason that he's moved up in the organizations is because he's the guy who runs towards danger. He said,
Yeah.
if you want to move up in the organization, put yourself in harm's way. That's the way he put it. And that's what you just said. It's people who are willing to put themselves in harm's way and do what needs to be done to get where the organization needs to go.
Well, you look at all these successful executives, and that's exactly why they got there, because they took a job that nobody else wanted, or they took a job and they weren't concerned about getting fired. They weren't concerned about losing their job. They were more concerned about, delivering the results that were expected than to worry about what people care with, what people think about them, or worried about, geez, if I don't do this right, if I don't do it right, which is maybe the way that they think somebody else is going to do it, they're going to get fired. Like I think about my 90-day contract every 90 days. I have a responsibility to go and deliver on expectations every 90 days. I've lived that way for 30 years, and I don't think I could live any other way. But truth be told, being a leader requires, a long-term vision, and you need to pull the levers and turn the knobs all throughout those 90 days to ensure you've got success for many years to come.
So,
but I know that, if something happened and maybe I made a big mistake, or maybe I didn't deliver on my commitments, could happen. I mean, it could happen. And if they asked me to move, to leave the organization, I know even to this day that we wouldn't miss a beat.
because of the organization you built under you.
Yeah. Yep.
That says a lot. I was going to ask you a question, but this could be the answer to the question. So tell me something. You've now had a several decades long career as a leader. What are you most proud of as your legacy as a leader?
I don't know. I'm going to answer that question a little bit differently. And, I often get asked, how have you become so successful? And my answer to that question is, am I? Like, what is success? What does success mean to you? You describe what success is, and I'll tell you if I'm successful in your mind. Am I successful? I mean, look, I am very, difficult on sort of myself. I look back, by the way, let me go on record and say, I wouldn't change a thing. I used to preach about work-life balance to people and all these things. And then one day I woke up and I was like, you're preaching about it because you don't have it and you never will. So just stop talking about it and don't try to coach people to have work-life balance, because you are not qualified to be a coach. Okay. You're trying to tell somebody how to play tennis, and you don't even know what a tennis racket looks
As a
like.
coach, I tell people that work-life balance is bullshit. Anyway,
It
so
is.
don't
It
worry.
is bullshit. I'm telling you. And so it's, I look back, my kids I've got two that are about to graduate high school, going to college. I've got one that's going to graduate college in December. You know, I walked into my kids' middle and high school the other day, no joke. And I had an opportunity to help my wife serve senior lunch because I happened to be in town. And we're walking down the hall. And my wife's like, "Oh, this is so and so." I was like, "Oh, hi, good to see you." She's like, "We've never met." And I was like, "Oh, okay." She's like, "Do you know your children have been here for over 10 years? I have never met you." I actually, to the point where some of my children's friends don't even think I'm alive. I mean, like that's how often I'm not home. And so this is back to the success thing. Am I successful? I mean, my wife raised three great kids as a single mom. Could I have done things differently? Yeah, probably. But would it have afforded me the career that I've had?
Mm.
Absolutely not. I don't like to think of me being successful because then that means I'm done. And I'm not done.
You're
I
young.
feel like I'm going to do this as long as they'll let me and as long as I'm having fun. And so maybe when the day comes and I have the opportunity to retire and kick back and sit with my feet in the sand and have a beer, maybe I can look back and say, yeah, gee, I was successful. I don't know. Until then, I'm just going to keep going.
It's interesting. I interviewed you when I was writing the book Mastering Midlife, which turned into a podcast instead of a book. And you were kind enough to talk to me way back then when I was doing this, because I've been doing this for a really long time now. And you said, and a couple of other people they interviewed said, if you're going to have a career where you're balls to the wall, you have to have an agreement with your significant other that this
Mhm.
is what we're going to do. This is the sacrifice you need to make. This is the sacrifice I'm going to make. This is where you need help. So, have you had those negotiation conversations with your wife
Oh,
over the years?
oh my gosh. Let me tell you. So I told you the data domain story. Then I go to work at ServiceNow and I sat my wife down and I said, "Look, I'm starting over again. You're not going to see me for 4 more years." She's like, "I mean, come on. Like, what else is new?" And so, truth be told, that happened. Fast forward, Frank called me and said, "You're coming to work at Snowflake." And I sat, and at this point in my life, I was a little bit different. I'm obviously a lot older. Financially, I'm, in a little bit more flexibility, but and my kids are a little bit older and they're, sort of at the tail end of being at home. And I sat my wife down. I had already made the decision to go. She's already been a single mom her entire life. And I sat her down and I said, "I'm going to do this again. And you're not going to see me for 4 years. Like, full stop. I got to go. And I am not going to do this half-assed." And she looked at me and she goes, "John, I wouldn't have it any other way." And then COVID hit. And I was home for 2 years straight. Now, I mean, you want to talk about a shock to the system. I'm almost flown 3 million miles domestically. And so COVID hits. Living in Georgia, we were a little bit more flexible, and we had signed a lease to open an office in Atlanta, December 2019. Was supposed to be ready April 20. COVID hit. It gets ready. I'm gonna re. I'm. It gets ready in June of 2020. I called up my CFO and I was like, "You got to get me in that office. I can't work from home." And so, I actually worked in an office by myself for a year and a half. Now I started traveling a little bit more, and it was really interesting to go through that period because I I almost sort of overcompensated a little bit
Mm.
to the point where my kids started calling me non-John. They call me, you can ask any one of my kids. They called me non-John. You're like, you're not yourself. Like, get rid of that guy who, thinks he's gonna be the work-life balance guy. Get rid of him. We want regular John back. And so that lasted for a little bit there, and non-John, we got rid of him.
I love that you know who you are, right?
Yeah.
You know who you are. You know what you need. Your wife knows who you are. Your kids know who you are, and somehow they all grow. Everybody grows up, and everybody's good as long as we're honest about what we're doing, and and what's important to all of us. The difference would be is if your wife was like, "No, I want a husband who is at the parent
Yeah.
teacher concert." Then you have to have another conversation. But you've been married for a long time, and so it works, right? So that's pretty cool. So I'm curious, what do you think is next for your leadership journey? Where do you
Well,
think
I
you're
mean,
headed?
I can tell you, well, I mean, I've got to take a customer out to dinner tonight, and thank them for our business, and then no, I'm just kidding with you. I don't know. I don't I Mark, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about that.
That's
I
why
mean,
I
for
like
me,
that
it's not.
answer. That answer was perfect. The answer is
I
I'm doing
don't.
what I do, and I
I'm
haven't
good.
mapped out a career. I'm gonna go where I'm needed, and it's gonna go that way. And I'm
That's the way it's always been for me. I mean, I get asked that question all the time, and it's I never chase a title. I never chase a role. You know, I just go and do the job that they ask me to do, and when there's a challenge, I go and run to it and try to do it better and try to fix it.
That's
And
amazing.
for that, I'm good. I'm good. I live in Atlanta. If I am who I am for the rest of my life, I am good, and I'm all right with that.
And John, there's a bunch of Mark J. Silvermans who are so grateful that their paths crossed because we talked before I turned on the mic, and most people who listen to my podcast know my story of being homeless and all the stuff that I've gone through. You met me at the lowest point in my entire life, and that was the year that I turned everything into gold. And because of you and Kevin Haverty and Snyder and Collins and O'Donnell and all those people, you know, it, I am who I am today. So there's a bunch of me's around because you are that kind of guy. So you have a legacy that
That
I'm
was you,
really
Mark.
proud of.
That was you. That wasn't us. We were just there to help you get through those times. I mean, look, just like Collins, just like Haverty, just like all those guys, we recognized that diamond that was inside of you that we just needed to get you comfortable and confident about who you are and who you were as a person and what your capabilities were. And you didn't disappoint anybody. You just at time after time delivered on what needed to be done, and you were extremely organized and thoughtful about it. And there was never a point in time that we ever questioned our decision there, man. It was, again, talk about an opportunity to be proud of what somebody's accomplished. This is a prime example.
And this is why I had you on the podcast. And this is where we're going to end on how amazing Mark is. John, thanks for sharing yourself. Thanks for sharing your journey and your wisdom. I just really appreciate you.
I got to tell you, I'm humbled to have been asked, especially given the cast of individuals that are have been before me and are going to be after me. So, thanks for having me, Mark. And it's great to talk to you again.
It's amazing. To everybody else, I really appreciate your time and attention. I love you. Have a great rest of the day.